Yes, that's right. This is Let's Talk Call-In Radio, and we were, if you were one of Steve Hurwitz's groupies, Stephen Hurwitz's groupies, a big fan of Stephen Hurwitz.
Where's Steve?
He was scheduled to be back here, but he's having cataract surgery today, so we shan't be seeing him.
He'll be seeing us.
He'll be fine. He'll be fine. But
gracious,
he shall return next week. That will be a big day. This is Let's Talk Call-In Radio. Getting to the root causes of important issues of the day. It's an on-air community forum in which your voice matters. This show is all about you, listeners, not about us sitting here yammering away. I know nothing about most of what we talk about here. It's all cramming during the week.
Don't let on.
And but we welcome your thoughts, and we shall try to do it without judgment. In fact, we will do it without judgment. We'll listen, and if we have a point to raise with you, we'll just have a lovely discussion about it. Please join the conversation today by calling 415-663-8492 or 8317, or tweet us. You can even tweet us at Let's Talk on KWMR. And today's subject, when you hear the phone ringing, okay, you'll call in on 8492 or 8317. You'll hear a funny little buzzy, hissy noise as I put you into the system. Please hang on. Don't hang up if we don't talk to you right away. Hang on, and when you hear me say you're on the air, please be prepared to give us a name. And turn your radio down, because that will be very confusing. And please, the most important thing of all, keep the language clean, please, because, the FCC does not like the 7 deadly words. And today...
your hosts are Paul Raffel and myself, Charles Schultz. But I was going to say that today is revisionism. What do you mean, Paul Raffel? What is the topic?
Well, so this was spurred by, of course, the demolition of those statues, of Confederate statues of generals called Beauregard and all kinds of ridiculous things in New Orleans. And it sort of struck me, I could see both sides, you're taking away symbols of history that, a lot of people in the South especially still revere, because, it wasn't about slavery, it was about it was about states' rights.
States' rights to have slaves. Yeah.
Except that, the vice president of the Confederacy actually said it was all about
he came clean.
Yeah.
Well, just take one example of this. I grew up and was raised a Catholic. I was an altar boy, an elector, and there was a pedophile priest that I knew. And when this was exposed, and actually, it permanently undermined my confidence that he never came on to me. I'm still a little upset about that. What's wrong with me? Is it me? But they took his picture down in the church, and I thought, that's, I had a neighbor who's really incensed about it. He said, no, that's history. You can't should blow the picture up. There
this is the thing. I can see it was a wonderful speech by Mayor Mitch Landrieu of New Orleans. He made a lovely speech and made all the right points, that this was about glorifying a little 4-year glitch in the history of the USA. And these guys, the Civil War, and that the generals, the Confederacy, was on the wrong side of humanity, he put it, on the wrong side of history for sure. And that think about if you were, he brought up the example of a young black girl walking to school, walking by this statue every day, and what do parents tell her about who this person was, about that he thought that she should not be given any rights at all and should stay on the plantation. So, we know what the impetus is, but it got me thinking a little bit about changing history, revising history, in the mood of the moment, in the mood of the current culture. And what it turns out, what I didn't actually know, really, I'd never really thought about this, but of course history is revised all the time. It's
Oh,
revisionist historian. There's a American Historical Association Perspectives on History magazine, and there's a lovely article here about revisionist historians, which is what they all are.
Well, yeah, there's a subtraction, which is taking the statue away, and then there are the rather interesting attempts at addition. So Richmond natives like Kelly Dunay and Matt Porter, our neighbors in Marshall, will know, of course, about the avenue in Richmond in which they have these statues of Lee and Longstreet and Jackson, etc. Rather than take them down, they just added one. They put up a statue of Arthur Ashe, the tennis player, at the end of all of these. So,
well, that was one of the things. Instead of taking them away, why not add more heroes of whatever heroes you want to choose?
Well, it was a big scandal.
Representative.
It was a scandal in Richmond at the time to add Arthur Ashe, who, the African American tennis player, not the white, Civil War general, Confederate general, but
oh, did they make a mistake?
No, it's just hysterical because it is a weird attempt at sort of rebalancing. Well, in Arlington, which is where next to the Pentagon, right in Virginia, the main artery of traffic in Arlington is Jefferson Davis Highway, right? The president of the Confederacy,
right.
and when did that get named? The 40s or something? Right. But no, I would say don't take it down. Revisionism, in my mind, has always been a pejorative. I mean, because of what was called Stalinist revisionism, where you simply delete some for a photograph. If you look up revisionism, that's what you're going to get a picture of. Oh, and we have a call.
Well, but as I say, it turns out that revisionism is an accepted part of being a historian. You as new facts come in, as new evidence comes in, as archaeology or documents come in, history is the view of a certain events in history can be changed. Caller, you're on the air. What's your name, please?
Robin.
Robin,
oh, well.
How are you?
Hello, I'm in Stinson Beach.
Oh.
Gentlemen, love your program.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
This issue around the monuments, I just wanted to add something in here which you have to think about it. The Civil War is, in my opinion, not a popular part of people's past, but I don't think we can wipe it out, and I don't think we can wipe out a reference to the Civil War because we think it's going to wipe out some racism, or it's going to wipe out the injustice or memories of slavery. And I feel somehow I wish you could sort it out about the historical relevance of these Civil War monuments, and then that I think the backlash comes, and of course I look at it, and the first thing that happens is I go, oh, racist, get rid of it. Slavery, get rid of it. And I realize that, again, the Civil War is not the most popular part of the history that we study. And I'll just take your comments off air. I just wish you could break that out a little bit for me. So many people think that we're somehow removing a symbol of racism by removing a monument. And I just would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, I mean, immediately.
Thank you.
Well,
Thank
you,
you,
Robin. But immediately what comes to mind, and this happened last year, I think, there was an African-American man at Harvard. I don't know if he was a student or just an employee. There was an image of black people working in a field in one of the stained glass windows there in the building he worked in or went through in Harvard, and he broke it out with a rock, right, because he was offended by what was being represented there. That doesn't change the history of Harvard. That doesn't change the fact that say the University of Virginia was built by slaves and a beautiful edifice they created. And so, I think that if there's a picture that you find so offensive, we'll take people to see it. Don't get rid of it, because in a way it allows these entrenched centers of power like Harvard and its alumni and its endowments and its whole history and legacy. Don't allow them to erase the story of where that power came from, in a way, I wouldn't say celebrate it, but highlight it. So don't break the window out. Take people to see the window and say, wow, what's this all about? But, I mean, the other thing would be like Jefferson. Jefferson is this, monumental figure in American history. Very little is known about. You wouldn't want to throw out the Constitution because he was also a slaveholder.
Because they were slave owner. Most all of them were.
But it's a contradiction that needs to be dealt with. But not to throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Right. Do we get rid of the Jefferson Memorial? Do we, all that stuff? And
what would remain standing?
So let's see. Part of Mitch Landrieu's speech was the historic record is clear. These statues were not erected just to honor these men, but as part of the movement which became known as the Cult of the Lost Cause. This cult had one goal, through monuments and through other means, to rewrite history to hide the truth, which is that the Confederacy was on the wrong side of humanity. They were erected purposefully to send a strong message to all who walked in their shadows about who was still in charge in this city. They purposefully celebrate a fictional, sanitized Confederacy, ignoring the death, ignoring the enslavement, and the terror that it actually stood for. It's an interesting thing. I mean, a monument, who cares really? A statue, take it down, melt it down, and make something else out of it, a monument to somebody else, or make something useful out of it. But it's not a incredibly valuable thing. But but for that a whole section of, certainly in New Orleans, of society there, they saw it as a daily affront. They have to see this every time they go downtown. They have to see this.
They should be angry at the banks.
It seems like an alternative would be. I guess this was probably the cheapest option, but alternatives would maybe be to have some kind of display around the monument, actually showing what these guys actually did, what they stood for. You could add some kind of informational thing to the bottom of the statue instead of. Instead of it being a reverential image, right?
Well, this is a deeply personal thing as well. We talked about this last week when we were talking about religion and atheism. The symbols of our culture, they're part of our baggage, and they lead us back into our history, and they lead us into those contradictions. Think about your relationship with your parents, often very, very complex and maybe filled with lots of unhappiness, but also maybe great happiness as well, and the wisdom you got from them, or whatever it is. We like this idea of deletion. We like this idea of get rid of the past and then you'll be free. I don't think it's true. And look at the positive stats you have. Now, you have in Washington, D.C., a giant white stone sculpture of Martin Luther King, built by the Chinese, and looking not just a little bit like the images of the great helmsman. It's a figure of Mao. Does that make us a better society that there's a statue of a great hero? What
does it really change? And
this is 663.
663-8492, 415-663-8492, or 8317. Do give us a call if you have. Give us your thoughts on this. It was email from Mark Dowie. Thank you, Mark. Common aphorisms about history include: history is made by great people, history is made of big events, history is made by the winners, and history is made by those who show up. Of course, they're all wrong. History is made by historians, and historians draw their material from the archival effluvia of humans who preceded them, among whom are archivists, librarians, correspondents, essayists, journalists, and, yes, statuary sculptors. There you go. So all the history that we've been taught, it's as in the case of the Bible, it's all written by human hands, and humans are notoriously biased.
Well, but that's fine. And the question is to understand what the biases are, and to appreciate the text as the text itself too. It's not just contextualizing things out of existence, which we do a lot of. But the other thing that's difficult about this, just in the case of the South, is that since the early 70s and American wealth and power begins to decline, and its industrial base is eroded. Instead of a focus on high wages, full employment, et cetera, there was this creep in both the Democratic and Republican parties to merely celebrate the unique identities of the electorate, rather than actually using government as a way to try and make people's lives better. It was sufficient simply to say that we respect and we love you. Now, it's creepier on the Republican side because it gets, in the 70s in earnest, into the religious right, and they activate what had been a dormant force or dormant population in American politics. I mean, before the 70s, those churches, the low church Protestants of the South, were told by their preachers, don't vote. The government is the devil, blah, 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 blah. And so they didn't. They stayed out. The Republicans activated them, appealing to their unique identity, et cetera, et cetera. Well, the Democrats do the same thing. And you get more and more as the decades progress saying, well, we want to celebrate the unique identity of African Americans. We love your music and your dances and your this and your that, and we applaud it. And, you can't find a professor of English that won't tell you how much they love rap music. I think there is an inverse relationship between how rich and white you are and how poor and black you are to how highly you regard rap music. If you're really rich and really white, you think it's the greatest thing ever. I think if you're really poor and really black, then you just think, well, that's what's on the radio.
The point is that they're not it's not American music, it's black music.
Well, but so think about the poor of the southeastern United States, right? And they are the poorest whites in America. Right. While they would rightly, in that framework, claim, don't we have a unique identity? And can't we have the stars and bars, the flag of the Confederacy hanging in our garage to remind us of our...
This is the argument that
I think
supporters of the Confederate flag, for example, have, right?
But neither of them is a critical perspective.
Part of our history.
Well, or identity. It's really part of our identity.
Yes,
it's who I am.
Right.
So, I mean, I think that it's a pernicious way of thinking about oneself and the past. And I think that both the Republican and Democratic parties have cultivated this in a really pernicious way because it's easier than actually doing something about the problem of poverty. Is simply to say, as right-wing Republicans do in the South, I like you because you're white, or as
a Southern strategy that was brought about by what, Reagan?
No. I mean that goes back to the 60s.
Take the Dixiecrat, take it away from the Dixiecrats and get it into the Republican.
But that had almost completely happened by 1960. Certainly by 1964, all of the Democrats in the South had become Republicans at that point, and still are to this day. But so there's a real problem here, and it's a problem about inequality. It's not a problem about identity. And but for me, if there is a sculpture that refers back, think of all of the terrifying monuments that we've had. Should we take down Nero's column? Should we?
Exactly. Where do you draw the line? This is part of and what do monuments mean, really, and how can they be viewed differently if you object to them? Can you do something about the monument, or just getting rid of them is easy, right?
The offense
also just bring in a high lift and drag it down.
Also, I mean, if you're offended, that's a good thing, and you should think about why is this society constructed in such a way that this tiny group of people have all of this power, and would it be a better world if you took away all memory of the fact that we live in an oligarchy, or we live in this really destructive empire? If nobody said it, would this create a state of grace? Would this make us holy? Would it make us good?
So taking away the statues takes away a reminder for people who are actually know the history. They're taking away a reminder of the terrible things that happened.
Sure. Well, I mean,
they've done.
Yeah, and you think about just say.
Yeah, that's the dichotomy of the whole thing.
Well, Lincoln and certainly people of his mind and his generation did not see a big difference between wage slavery and chattel slavery had in the South. They both thought of them as states of degradation. So should we tear down the University of Chicago because it was built by the Rockefeller family, who exploited the earth and human beings terribly, and have now had this massive concentration of wealth? if we removed all the statues of John D. Rockefeller, all the references from him, would that change the social and political and economic order we have, where there are these few people that sit at the top and use the world and its people, for their own.
We should not have a Nobel Prize because he invented dynamite.
I don't know. It just seems to me it's the wrong point. Although, like I say, there's an argument that said that the North was too easy on the South.
I see both sides of the argument. That's the tricky thing about this whole thing. Summer Brennan wrote, "The best comparison I heard was in Germany there are no statues of Hitler but plenty of public works to commemorate the Holocaust." So there's an example of...
It's an interesting one, because in Germany it's actually a crime to wear a swastika or to praise Hitler or to deny the Holocaust. Those things are crimes.
As it is in France. It's a crime to deny the Holocaust.
I just think it's really problematic. As if you believe in free speech, you have to believe in the most odious kind of speech that you can imagine, and that would be someone who denies the Holocaust. But I think it should be allowed. I don't think it should be a crime. Because, again, this is the idea that we can coerce people into being good. We can make it a law to be against the law to be bad in that kind of way, in the way that people think. It's not a crime, although it would surprise people of my generation probably to know it. It's not a crime to be a bigot in the United States. You can be, and they're all around us, by the way. You have more than a 2-minute conversation with people in West Marin, and you'll find bigotry and prejudice all over, and things that you would never have expected. I run into anti-Semites all the time. I run into people who don't like black people, or whatever. And not all the time. Not this morning.
Right now.
right. But so that's there. But that's okay. You have the freedom to be a bigot in the United States. You don't have the freedom to harm people that you don't like. But I think there's a weird dimension to the German ban on Nazi imagery, a weird dimension to the idea of a hate crime. That it's. I would always say, look at the economic conditions that you're dealing with. When people are doing better economically, better able to look after themselves, control their own lives, you have less conflict and prejudice. And when things start to get really nasty, then the prejudice comes in as a proxy, right? That's what the Nazis were doing with anti-Semitism. They were saying, oh, you have all these problems? Look, we know exactly what the source of them is. It's that guy over there. And if we just get rid of him, then everything will be fine. But the reverse of that would be, to say that the real problem in America today is that there's still racism. It is a problem, but it isn't. I think economics has to come into that
within the system. He who controls the past controls the future. He who controls the present controls the past. Where is that from? A quiz. 1984.
You didn't allow anybody to call in. 663-8492. The topic is revisionism, or how we go back into history and edit it so it suits us. And this is supposed to be positive revisionism. This is going back in history and taking ugly things and trying to erase their memory. But I would think that would be really dangerous. Right?
In 1984, for example, which is breaking, or it's back on the bestseller list again for obvious reasons, where the party controlled history by destroying history, rewriting history, taking even newspaper, The Times, from 5 years ago, changing it all, burning the original. The new version is the original. They control history. They control memory, because memory is fleeting. Memory is mutable. So they just tell you what you're remembering is wrong. Oceania has always been at war with East Asia.
Well, we lived in an amnesiac society. Most people are born to the world new every day, and there isn't this accumulation of memory, and that's extremely dangerous. And we live with the consequences.
And the current administration's characterization of anything that displeases them as fake news, right? That's an Orwellian nightmare in the making, right? When you dismiss anything that you don't like as being not true, right?
Okay, but there's a basic democratic ideal here which says that there is a peaceful passage of power from one regime to another. It isn't violent. And I think people who want to impeach Trump or, say these kind of things, I think there's an element of danger in that. Now, the other side, if you take their line, is that Trump is a figure on the level of a Hitler or a Stalin that's so dangerous that he has to be stopped at all costs. I don't think so, but I also think it's really dangerous to try and break that tradition we have of the peaceful passage of power from one party to another. Yeah. If you don't like Trump, get real worried about the midterm elections next year, and get real worried about 2020. But this idea that Trump must be eliminated, we got to get rid of all of this, those bad people. And what I like to say is that Trump is the wrong kind of fake news. Hillary would have been the right kind of fake news for West Marin, and everyone would have gone back to sleep. Right. And I didn't see anybody calling for Obama's impeachment for the last 8 years, and a correspondence I've been having with Norman Solomon, he points out quite correctly that all of the bombing and illegal wars Obama took on with gusto, the illegal surveillance of American citizens, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Where were the people who wanted to impeach him? So I don't know how much I credit those people who are so upset about Donald Trump.
Another Orwell quote, people most readily believe that which they can believe most conveniently.
Well,
isn't that so?
It's 663-8492, talking about history, our relationship to history, and revisionism. I have a piece of revisionism. If you read the Point Raised Light this week, you'll read an interview that I did with W.R. Baker, and Wade Holland reached out to me to say...
Somebody edited it?
Wade Holland reached out to me to say he loves W.R. Baker and loved it when he would come on my radio program. And so I want to dedicate it to Wade and say thank you, Wade, for your words.
That is revisionism of history, right?
Revisionism, that's the truth. And Wade, if you disagree, call in. 663-8492.
8492. E.H. Carr, famous historian, delivering a lecture back in the 60s. The historian and his facts. The historian is necessarily selective. The belief in a hard core of historical facts existing objectively and independently of the interpretation of the historian is a preposterous fallacy, but one which is very hard to eradicate. He has the dual task of discovering the few significant facts and turning them into facts of history, and of discarding the many insignificant facts as unhistorical.
Well,
who gets to, who decides? Historians decide.
Also, there's no final text.
And that was 50 years ago. It's changed now. Whatever.
The thing is, when you read any text, you don't read it as final. You don't read it as this is that's why people don't like things like the Bible and the Quran, is because it's treated as though this is the absolute truth, the Word of God, and so if you just repeat it or you just follow it, then not that anybody follows it. Well, the Old Testament a bit. We like a bit of genocide here and there, but then that's a problem. So you read every text with a certain suspicion, I think.
Whereas monuments seem more... more
tangible,
more lasting, more. Yes, I don't know. Tearing down monuments. Why not tear them down? But then why?
Put them all in a park or a building called the Hall of Monsters.
Oh, hey, see, there you are.
And make little kids go have a look. Actually, they'll like it better. I mean, that's the problem. They're like, we don't want to see the good people. Can we go back to the Hall of Monsters? Yeah. I don't know. It's just you want to know what came before you. Do we know it imperfectly? Of course we do. But all of this idea that we can palimpsest, we can write over or paint over the past contains a terrifying possibility that the memory will be lost. And as generations passed, it would never have occurred to the wartime and then the boomer generation in Germany that you would need to explain to people the horrors of the Second World War, the horrors of fascism and Nazism. But by the time you get to my generation, what is the link back to the past? I'll give you an example of this. So the myth of the Good War, right, or the myth of resistance, right? De Gaulle gets back to France and says, "Well, we all resisted." Well, it's simply not true.
Yeah, exactly.
There was a huge amount of collaboration between the French populace and the Nazis, but you come out, or the Greatest Generation, right? That myth too that functions in the United States. Well, I can tell you, I think that there's a huge amount of violence that was transmitted by those people who came back from the war into the culture in spousal abuse, in child abuse, all different kinds of violence. But because it was the good war, and because that was the only story that it could be told about it, there is is no memory by the time we get to my generation of the transmission of that violence and the connection of that violence to the war itself. And if you look in the books, it's just the greatest generation. We're the good guys or the bad guys. In an overarching sense, they were the bad guys and we were the good guys. But in the specific experience of individuals, a huge amount of psychic and physical violence that entered the culture. Think of people coming back from Vietnam in the same way and not being able to talk about Vietnam.
I was always very struck by people of my soldiers, ex-servicemen from World War II of my father's age. They get into their 70s and 80s, and when they talk about the war, they're crying.
Yeah.
Because they've held it in all those years. And finally, when the testosterone is dropping a little bit, they're feeling the pain that was that it caused them, even though they may think it was the best time in their lives. It was the most exciting. They got to go to other places. We do have a caller. I'm going to put you in the system, caller, but I do have to just do some underwriting stuff. Please hang on. This is KWMR Point Radio Station, and programming support for KWMR is supported by Lucid Art Foundation, a non-profit in Inverness that explores consciousness through art, engages in a variety of activities, including annual seminars for professional artists, an artist residency program, publications, exhibitions, and collection management. More information and sign-ups at their website, lucidart.org, or 415-669-7585. And programming on KWMR, also brought to you by the Maritime Radio Historical Society, working to preserve West Marin's rich radio heritage. The nation's last working Morse code coast station is in action every Saturday from 12 to 4 p.m. at the RCA receiver site, 17400 Sir Francis Drake Boulevard, just past G Ranch on Point Reyes Peninsula. Information at 415-663-8982 or online at radiomarine.org. That's radio, marine.org. Thank you to our underwriters. And caller, you are on the air. What's your name, please?
Sally?
Sally?
Oh,
well.
Yes, it's me.
Oh.
Such gravitas I infuse into the discussion immediately.
Sally?
Sally?
Yes, Your Grace.
Hello. Great topic.
Right.
I'm just thinking about selectivity and the desire for humans to find something like the ultimate objectivity or what is the, ineffable perspective, which is what you were saying, Charles, about the Quran and the Bible and, heck, even the Constitution, where people try to read things as if they are, the penultimate doctrine of perfection and truth. But also, like with your discussion of World War II, yes, it is called the Good War, but then what happens is we don't learn unless we read someone like Howard Zinn. We don't learn that a lot of the Nazi scientists were given shelter after World War II in our country, and that we brought them in and utilized their particular talents. So that, history is highly selective in how it's talked about. So that if you're the person then that researches this sort of the shadow side, for example, of World War II, you're called maybe a crack conspiracy theorist, or there are always these people who research, and I think sometimes they come up with credible, if wacky sounding, alternative information. There are a lot of guys doing it now, like Dave Emery. I used to go hear him speak, and sure, he seemed like a nutburger, but...
Hey, I haven't heard that name in a long time. Sorry, go on, Sally.
No, I mean, it's just interesting. I think it engenders more critical thinking the more if you can open yourself up to different perspectives, which can be painful if you're talking about right-wing news outlets. The other...
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, carry on.
Just the other point is really a terrible knowledge of history, but having gone to film school, what I learned about documentary filmmaking is that, and I just think it's true for every kind of writing down or cataloging or retelling of any history, any story. The minute you place that camera, you've set an angle. There's no such thing as objectivity. There's a person, he's making a decision, whatever runs that decision or drives it, to set the camera up and to use a particular lens and to shoot from a particular angle and then to edit. You know, there's choice and choice and choice. Yeah. So when you're talking about revisionism, it's just, what would you call it? Endemic. Charles, help me with my vocabulary.
Everything is subjective. All history is subjective to a certain extent.
Well, no, I
there
think
are facts and there are truths.
No, well, you need to embrace your subjectivity because not that the truth is unknowable, but accepting the conditions of the way that we access the truth that Sally is talking about. So, you know, if the New York Times had said Donald Trump is a dirtball and we're going to take him down, they would have done better in terms of defeating him as president in 2016. Instead, by pretending to be objective, they just look like the kind of manipulative creeps that the American elite produces and that the people who voted for Trump hate. But a little subjectivity would have gone a long way, I think, with that.
Sally, it was interesting you were talking about without other voices, maybe crackpot theories, that the discussions might go away. And I was thinking about Holocaust denial, you know,
well,
I mean, that kind of thing, where there's actual active discussion and very heated discussion about something that is a crackpot idea, but it keeps that memory of that terrible history going.
Well, I think in some sense, I mean, there are things that I'm happy to say are considered odious to discuss. So if somebody introduces the idea that the Holocaust didn't happen in conversation, most of us kind of recoil. Or if somebody says, well, rape's debatable. I don't want to live in a society where rape is debatable or you know, the Holocaust is debatable. On the other hand, you always have to maintain this position of self-criticism. This place, and there are many like it in the United States, is so smug, and it confuses its smugness for wisdom. And they love the idea that the president is this bad guy, and he and his supporters are somebody else somewhere else. I'll give you an example. The trial of the Nazi doctors, as a part of the whole Nuremberg trial process, they tried the doctors, and the doctors referred to forced sterilization as, quote, the Indiana procedure. Why did they call it the Indiana procedure? Because it comes from a case that was heard by the Supreme Court, which I believe is Best versus the state of Indiana, and the decision was written by Oliver Wendell Holmes, which sanctioned forced sterilization. In this case, because it was a single Irish woman who was a prostitute. Well, they said, well, actually, she's mentally infirm. Well, the reality was she was just an undesirable character, right. And so the state was allowed to sterilize this woman.
Eugenics.
Yeah, this woman. Right, and well, the history of eugenics in the United States and American pragmatism itself is a very dark history, and it actually links us to the Nazis. It doesn't separate us from them. And the Nazis themselves said that. They said, well, yeah, we got the idea from you.
And let's not forget that the manual that surgeons use has illustrations in it that were drawn in concentration camps. They were operating on the bodies of Jews. Jewish doctors in prison being forced to do doing autopsies and doing other experimentation on Jewish prisoners, and it ends up being in the main textbook that doctors use in the U.S. today.
But I'd agree, so there's a myth of objectivity, and what you ought to do is exactly what you say. When you point that camera at something, all of the choices that go into that, or just say what you actually think. And don't worry about people who are going to nitpick and say, well, that's not exactly what he said on page 39. You have to embrace your subjectivity. We live in an object culture, which has reduced thought to simply a collection of things that you have in your head, or you have, in your house. And
isn't the newspaper designed around delineated by an opinion section and editorials, opinions, and so that you have what they call sort of more hard and fast reporting of who, what, when, why, where, and then the other section is more the opinions of hopefully intelligent people.
That's the
Not
principle.
intelligent.
The
whatever.
principle that Fox News turned into all day, all the time, not reporting news, but having opinion pieces all the time.
Well, the problem is there's this epistemic gap between what somebody's telling you about what's going on the other side of the world and what's actually happening on the other side of the world. I realized reading The Economist, which some people rate as an interesting magazine to read, having worked in politics in the Bay Area for a few years, I looked at The Economist once, and it had a sort of section on the Bay Area, which I realized they had cobbled together from a couple of Chronicle articles. There was no research there, but if you didn't live in the Bay Area and you weren't engaged in politics, that would pass as a correct representation of what was going on. And so what that taught me is you don't know unless you know. And so I think that the problem is all this information about the world is really how we maintain our feeling of control over our own lives. And so then you select the ideological slant that you want, and you go mostly to that website, and it gives it back to you. And it's funny how these articles migrate across the internet. So if you don't like lesbians, you go to the Daily Mail, and the Daily Mail will have an article saying, depraved lesbians have sex in park. And then you can go to The Guardian, and you can read Jessica Valenti, who will write an op-ed saying, lesbian sex in park is great for our country. And you get whichever one you want. And, people do this all day, every day. But they're not actually learning about the world. This isn't learning or information that implies an intention or that generates an intention. This is just sort of looking at the kind of way you'd like to think about the world without actually having any responsibility to do anything about it. So the KPFA splatter paint activism every day, every hour, a new issue from some other corner of the world that you're never going to go to and don't really know anything about. Look, I appreciate Democracy Now! And stuff like that for giving a voice to those people. On the other hand, like the guys and women that went to North Vietnam, the activists during the Vietnam War, and Ho Chi Minh, at the very end of his life, is said to have told these people, "Hey, go back to your country and fix the problem there. Don't come to North Vietnam. We don't need you here." Or the Stanford grads that go to Kenya and put up solar panels. I challenge you: Google white woman with black child in Africa and look at the image. It is page after page after page of these grinning elite white women with their little children in some poor village there in Africa. Those people need to go back to Palo Alto and fix what's wrong there, and leave Kenya alone, if you don't mind. There
was a lot of criticism of Mitch Landrieu. I liked his speech very much, and the removal of these. I'm personally, my opinion is I'm for removing the statues. I think walls and statues are meant to be toppled periodically, and but there's also the fact that New Orleans has famously got like potholes that are like an ocean liner could get lost in. So people were critical and saying, why don't we put those resources towards fixing the roads and the infrastructure? And I'll leave it at that. But I think both of those things could happen. That's I think both should happen.
I think this was probably the cheapest way of changing downtown, is to take those statues away. It was cheaper than doing anything else.
Well, and a politician loves a press release and to do nothing but appear to be doing something. But
I think it's great. It's to strip away this ridiculousness and let the people who live in the suburbs who might want to be in a less integrated kind of community, let them make the choice to live in those communities.
Oh, we did. That's why we're in West Marin.
Yes, exactly.
And put a statue in their corner.
We don't have to put in the center of New Orleans the tourist center, this Confederate.
Jefferson
I think
Davis.
lauding these guys is silly, and it's like when I first started going to New Orleans, I saw a lot of Confederate flags were up in windows, and you don't see that anymore. And that is a good thing that you don't see that anymore.
I know a place in Marin County that flies a Confederate flag.
It wasn't there the other day.
I think because of this reason. It's
Charles took it down.
I did not. It still flies in Marshall.
Good for your show. I gotta go.
Okay, thank you, Sally.
Thank you so much, Sally. No, I mean, there's another problem with like deleting history, though. Adam Hochschild, when he did his book King Leopold's Ghost, one of the things that he discovered was that the people that live in the Congo today had basically no understanding of who Leopold was and what he did. They thought he was some kind of benevolent colonial overlord that gave them learning and education, where specifically in the case of the Belgian Congo, there was no, quote, civilizing mission at all. They didn't attempt to build any schools and hospitals. No. They didn't want anybody to learn, a different language or have any education. It was the most brutal example of African colonialism, but the generation of people in the Congo today, and it's not the only reason, they don't, in many cases, have a memory of that history, of who Leopold was and what the Belgians had done.
No, it was a terrible, repressive, murderous regime. Boy, Belgium, man. So
663-8492.
663-8492. Do call in. We've got about 10 minutes left here. So reload. This is from Mitch Landrieu's speech again. It's not about taking something away from someone else. This is not about politics. It's not about blame or retaliation. This is not a naive quest to solve all our problems at once. This is, however, about showing the whole world that we as a city and a people are able to acknowledge, understand, reconcile, and most importantly, choose a better future for ourselves. Otherwise, we will continue to pay a price with discord, with division, and with violence. To literally put the Confederacy on a pedestal in our most prominent places of honor is an inaccurate recitation of our full past. Because, he mentioned that it was a 4-year aberration, and yet New Orleans has been there for how long? 100,
well, 200 years. Yeah, French city now.
Right. So, it's a minor little blip, which was quite important in Southern history.
Yeah, and when the flood happened, I think it was 27. The whites all got together in a nice steamboat and putted out of town, playing a band on board playing the tune "Bye Bye Blackbird." So a fine history there in New Orleans. But no, I still think that subjectivity would say there is a specific thing that we need to change. That would be an intention. That would be a subject. This object culture says we need to do anything, right? So inevitably, the cynics take over, and it means that the easiest thing to do is the thing that is done. So I don't know if there is a path between taking down these sculptures and actually living in a more equal society. I'm not sure that there is an actual line between those two things. You have to stay focused on the subject.
And focusing on the subject, 415-663-8492. Give us a call. Let us know your thoughts about revising history and what parts of history should not be revised, and how would you go about it? Not a big subject. So what's happening right now, of course, is that under this administration's federal websites with information that is deemed inconvenient or inappropriate for this administration, they're wiping out mostly scientific discovery, climate change, of course, but in other places, EPA, Environmental Protection Agency's website, all references to climate change have been erased. It's apparently not a problem anymore, according to the EPA. Full-scale climate change denial mode. Scientists are watching Arctic researcher watching her citations dissolve into thin air. The citations are going away. They're removing all the citational evidence for these reports that they've been coming out with, so they can say, we can't find your citations. That is so Orwellian. That is 1984.
Yeah, that's creepy. Sure.
But and American historical memory is short. That's another short line from this. There's an interesting, doing research for this little show, came across this. Shinzo Abe
The former Prime Minister of Japan.
Prime Minister of Japan, who is a member of the Japanese Society for History Textbook Reform.
Oh, boy. Now, this is a huge issue between South Korea and Japan.
Oh,
since
man.
the war.
The Nanjing Massacre is now, he wants it to be referred to as Nanjing Incident. Or, yes, the Nanking Incident, he's calling.
Yeah.
Marco Polo Bridge Incident.
The rape of
is going
Nanking
away.
is what
Rape
it
of
is.
Nanking, exactly. Japanese actions inspired the peoples of Asia. and he wants, he's definitely, he's still talking about it, about the comfort women that were
forced
sex
prostitution.
slaves,
Yeah.
forced prostitution. His version of it is that they were there voluntarily.
Well, the Japanese are notorious for this because it is a deeply, deeply chauvinistic society. And, they repeatedly get in trouble for it. But, it is still a huge diplomatic issue between Korea, China, and Japan that Japan wants to whitewash its conduct in the 30s and 40s. And they don't want anybody to know about that. The terrifying thing would be that people my age and younger are not going to might be born into a world where they're not going to be able to find out what the story is. And I'd say mostly we're just become a very deeply uncurious population. An uncuriousness caused by cynicism, not stupidity. We don't want to know, basically, what Daddy did during the war.
Yeah, we want convenience. As I quoted earlier, it's the convenient memory is the easy one. That's the ones that you remember.
Yeah.
Because you don't want to really have to think too much about your memories.
Well, and the problem with that is, if you go back to the 70s in West Marin, there were a lot of great ideas that did not work out, that failed. But try and find those being memorialized or recorded anywhere. And that's the difficulty with this kind of revisionism, is that we create a fictional picture of the past, which actually doesn't help us, because some of those ideas were great ideas.
They'll probably be in the Point Reyes Light archive.
Oh, you could go to the Point Reyes Light archive. But, take Sim Vanderen's Marin Solar Village. Take the work that Mark and Donna Claveau did at the Farallones Institute. Where is that being celebrated today? And then the fatuousness of celebrating the Summer of Love, ridiculous. I knew one of the founders of the Haight-Ashbury Free Clinic. I said, "What was the Summer of Love like?" And he said, "Well, it was mostly, middle-class white women from back east, vomiting on me, having bad trips, having to be restrained." But yeah, that's goofy.
There were many sides to the Summer of Love.
Mr. Raffel.
I might say it.
Mr. Raffel, please. It's a family show. 663-8492. We have just like 6 minutes left. Although, can we bump what's coming up next?
No. Good heavens.
What is that?
That would be revisionist. What's coming up next? New School at Commonweal Conversations. Don't know who with today, but
Peter Barnes
that will be coming up at noon.
Peter Barnes is getting a massage over at the Foresters Hall. Maybe he'll come. Maybe it's him. Just going to come speak extemporaneously on some topic. Oh, revisionist history. Wade Holland went out of his way to say that my interview with W.R. Baker in this week's Point Reyes Light is a life-changing experience. I think he referred to me as a prince and a great man, and I would just like to thank Wade for that ringing endorsement. 663-8492.
If you believe Charles Schultz, call in 415-663-8492. And so this was all about changing history and doing away with facts. So what are facts, right? I mean, there's facts versus truth. There are actual things that happen, but everything can be seen in a subjective way. Truth is what you think it is, right? Truth is what you believe.
That's insane. I mean, it comes from
historians are humans, and so what they believe gets put into history.
Well, I mean, there is a fact of the matter. There is something called the truth, and it is like the highest human responsibility to try and figure out what it is. And those people that try and mystify reality, try and obscure the truth with their escapism, their fantasies. There's a line in Camus, I can't remember exactly, that the mislabeling or the misrepresenting of something adds to the sum of human misery. So when I disagree with people about what the word friendship or what the word community means, it's because, our fantasies, and we just have these labels we slap on stuff, our fantasies are ultimately destructive. We might not think that they're destructive for ourselves, but they're destructive to other people, and add to the sum of human misery. So stop it, everybody, and take Wade's recommendation. Read the Point Raised Light. Anyway, 663-8492. We have time for a quick call, please.
Do call in. Yes, history is made by winners. Oh, well, so history is, until, I don't know, fairly recently, history has always been about the big boys, right? I mean, it's been about the leadership. And as
official history, yes.
Yeah, I mean, where are the common people in all of history? Where are
the people who have like past lives? They're always Napoleon.
Where are the Greeks?
Where are the ditch diggers?
Where are the peasants of the world for the past 3,000 years? You don't hear very much about them, except perhaps in the Bible.
They're a silhouette. In college, I worked a professor's book that was about women in the workplace in early modern France. Call in, and you can buy that on Amazon. Her point as we're doing this is that you had to create a silhouette of the lives of women in say 1650, but it was a fascinating process to try and piece together what was actually happening. But it can be done.
It can be done, but most historians didn't want to do that because a lot of historians, academics, were from the same class as the ruling classes.
Churchill's history would be a great example of this. For instance, he wrote volume after volume about the Second World War, excluding lots of information. It wasn't declassified to the middle 60s, actually. Like, for instance, very popular Alan Turing, the Enigma machine, and all that stuff. That wasn't declassified, I think, until 65. And so, sure, you can buy his 5 volumes on the Second World War and not know anything about that. But, Churchill was a sort of a vulgar propagandist. You could say he was an eloquent propagandist, but and that's what that was. So, official history is written that way. And I think maybe it should still be read, but read with a grain of salt, read with some curiosity about, really? Is that really?
Well, that's the key, isn't it? Curiosity. Consciousness, as always, we always come back to this on every show. It's consciously being alive and conscious thought.
We're an uncurious people because it's dangerous. Knowledge can be decentering. Learning something new can shake up your whole personality and your whole life. So what we have is a sort of ersatz or proxy for curiosity. It looks like curiosity. It pretends it's curious, but its main function is avoiding what it doesn't want to know. And that's, that sums it all up.
Which applies to the EPA now. There you go. Okay, well, this has been
Let's Talk.
Let's Talk. Thank you, everybody, for listening in. Thanks to our callers today. We're on every Thursday at 11. Stephen Hurwitz should be back next week. Yes, the triumphant return of Stephen Hurwitz. KWMR does not take a stand on any of the issues discussed on Let's Talk. Opinions expressed on this program are those of the hosts and callers and don't necessarily reflect the views of KWMR, its board of directors, underwriters, or members. Next week, we'll be discussing...
But if you have suggestions, contact Paul Raffel.
I'll be sending the email out so you can all figure out what it's going to be.